Teachers of Reddit, what is something a student of yours has said that made you think, wow, there's no hope left for you? I'm a second grade teacher. I have a boy who lies constantly about anything. He was on camera watching the footage of himself punching a student in the face, and he crossed his arms and said, "If I didn't do it, then I didn't do it." The worst part is his mom believes every word he says and attacks the school for making him accountable for his actions. He's going to do something as an adult and go to jail. When they pull him away, I know he's going to be yelling, "If I didn't do it, I didn't do it." Story 2. On Friday, a girl told me that she and her mother were walking down the street behind an old man. The old man reached into his pocket for something and all his money fell onto the sidewalk. She and her mother ran and picked it all up. When the old man tried to take it back from them, they told him it was their money and to go to hell. Alright, it's early. I know that we've only read 2 stories so far, but what do you notice the common denominator is so far with these awful children? Awful parents! I have a feeling that this isn't going to be the last time that a crappy adult has a direct correlation with their child. But let's move on. Story 3. I had a senior say she didn't think it was fair. I've grown to hate that word, by the way, that my exams used short answer questions instead of multiple choice. She said, quote, "Some of us just aren't good writers." I responded with, "If you're a senior in college and can't string a few sentences together, something has gone wrong." She stormed out of class. Story 4. I ain't doing any of that crap. My mom already said she's signing the papers to drop out as soon as I turn 16. Edit. I know that many people often drop out and end up going back to get a GED. I sincerely hope this young man turns his life around. He's had an incredibly tough upbringing, and along with that, a history of violent conduct in and out of school. I tried my best to remain patient with him in my room and to motivate him any way I could. At the point he said those words, I just don't think there was anything more I could do. That was last year, and he hasn't been back to school this year. I really hope that at some point he figures things out and gets his life going in a positive direction, whatever that may be. Story 5. I had one student at a bilingual school in Mexico who, after being at this school and supposedly learning English for 5+ years, still couldn't speak it and barely tried to make any effort to learn anything. Didn't do assignments and failed almost every test. When we mentioned it to her parents, their attitude was that she doesn't really need it because she will marry someone who will take care of everything for her. My thought was, who wants to marry someone who doesn't know anything and makes no effort? Story 6. I work in an alternative school for kids kicked out of public school for severe emotional and behavioral issues. A lot of them are going to require government services for the rest of their lives. There's usually not just one thing they say, but we all know that they will never have normal lives. It's a little disheartening to hear a 6-year-old scream that he's going to effing kill you, especially when you were playing tag not 5 minutes before. There's a young boy who can be very sweet and is an adorable blonde butterball. However, he has pretty severe behaviors and gets restrained at some point on a daily basis. I saw his parents one day because they live in government-subsidized housing close by and walk him to school. It was 50 degrees out and the little boy was in a basketball jersey and shorts. His parents looked exactly how I expected them to look and were rude to all the staff they interacted with. It just showed me that no matter how much we do, he spends most of his life with his crappy parents. Edit. Having a child with behaviors doesn't inherently make someone a bad parent, but in our program specifically, most of the students come from harsh backgrounds, which either causes or exacerbates their behavior. Story 7. Had a student who was always acting up. I constantly tried talking to him about his behavior, and I wrote plenty of referrals. Throughout all of this, I would email and call his mother, but never got a response. One day, he was pacing around and texting someone. I told him to put his phone away, and he said, "I can't. I'm not too happy right now." So I said, "Will you take it out to the hall and I'll give you a minute?" His response really shook me. He said, "No, I'll sit down. I just want my mom to turn the water back on." When all you know about a student is what you see in the classroom, it can be easy to forget they may not have a great home life. So I did wonder, is there hope for him? But it also wasn't truly any fault of his own. He just had a crap home life where he was stricken by poverty. Story 8. I had a student say, "I don't need to learn any of this. I won't use it in real life." When I tried to explain why math is going to be useful, he responded, "You're a dumbass. Watch me get rich without even going to school." I mean, sure, it's been done, but probably not the best idea. Story 9. I had one 4-year-old who couldn't hold a pencil. He couldn't remember how to pick it up and didn't have the strength to push it down hard enough on the paper to get any leverage. He couldn't color, had no motor skills whatsoever. He didn't have a dominant hand. His parents liked to leave him at my learning center for an hour, even though he couldn't use the bathroom on his own. He was 4 years old and didn't have the slightest grasp of the alphabet, and couldn't retain anything we taught him. It took a month to get him to count to 10. My theory on all this is, on top of a learning disability / developmental delay his mom was in denial of, he was a natural lefty who was forced to use his right hand, but because of the disability, couldn't, and ended up not developing any motor skills in either hand. Poor kid. Story 10. I taught lower elementary. Most teachers will get frustrated at some point by how hard it can be to get a child who may be lacking upstairs some extra help. This was the case with one of my favorite students. It didn't matter that he couldn't do any of the work that his peers were doing due to his incredibly low IQ. He was performing at his ability level. But he was just so nice to everyone. I had set aside time every day to help him with his reading. We were using the short story of The Ugly Duckling. It had one short sentence on each page, and after 2 weeks, he could get through it with minimal help. However, reading the words isn't all there is to reading. I had asked him if he could tell me what the story was about since we had spent time on it every day for the last 2 weeks. He starts his oral retelling off great, and I'm super excited. This is a huge deal for my man because up until this point, I couldn't get any retell or comprehension out of him. I'm super pumped and he's feeding off my energy and he's so proud of himself. This kid is glowing. We are only 3/4 through the story though. We come up to the end of The Ugly Duckling and he's telling me that the duckling changes. This word took him forever to say, much less read, but then he stops, and he goes into this deep think stage. I prod him a little bit. He changes. What does he change into, bud? He brings his eyes back from the ceiling, and then, with the strangest smile, he shouts, "A butterfly!" I think that this is very encouraging. I don't think that this is a kid with no hope at all. Good for you, OP, for, putting in the work with this child, and man, leaps and bounds of improvement. We just gotta stick the landing of the Ugly Duckling story, but we'll get there. You're doing great. Story 11. High school teacher here. Dude, if you don't start coming to class and doing the work, you'll fail out of school. School's done nothing for me. I'm gonna rap to pay the bills, bro. Kid was an awful musician. Couldn't make a beat, couldn't write a rhyme to save his life. Story 12. I didn't teach, but I tutored / mentored for a few years. Heard one student say she didn't care about school, she didn't want to go to college because she will just go on welfare. One 6th grader was expelled for behavior, constantly was kicked out of class, fought, dress code violations, including wearing gang colors. Expelled at 13, couldn't multiply, could barely read, can't remember one specific thing he said to make me think he had no hope, but it was pretty depressing. Story 13. It's not what they said, it's what they didn't say. I asked him to read out loud and he just stared at the paper. I soon found out that he read at a kinder level as a 5th grader. Didn't want to put in the work himself, instead just waited for someone to read it for him. His comprehension was there, but he wanted everything spoon-fed to him. Story 14. During lunch duty at a high school, had to ask a kid who had a bad rep to move. He pulled over an extra chair to a table, making it so you could not easily get around that area, which was a very clear rule in the school for fire safety reasons. He does, but moves back. I gently remind him again, and say if I see it again, I'll have to write him up. He moves it back for about 5 minutes. Then, frustrated he can't hear his friends, looks at me, pulls his chair back to the table, hands me his ID and says, "I'm going to jail anyways." Took his ID to get his name, which I already knew, said thanks for cooperating, and then left him the F alone. He was in a fight a month later, had to be taken down by 3 school cops, and taken out of school in cuffs. Edit. All students had the option to go outside as well for lunch to be able to sit and talk in larger groups. He was offered that option by both his friends and me, and the weather was nice. The rule seemed stupid until when I was a student there and saw a kid have an allergic reaction and struggle to see adults and nurses get to the kid with 300 students, chairs, and tables in the way. Story 15. Not a teacher, but my wife had a student in 3rd grade who refused to do any writing assignments. My wife told him that she was going to call his parents to explain to them what was going on if he didn't start doing his work. He said, "I don't care. My mom said I don't have to do anything I don't want to. Rules don't apply to me. My wife called his mom, and his mom told my wife that she, meaning my wife, just has to understand how her son is, and if he doesn't want to do the work, then he doesn't have to. His behaviors all made sense after that, and it was a very tough year. He stopped doing all work and started harassing other kids, probably partially due to boredom, since he was doing nothing else by the end of the year. As long as he was happy, my wife couldn't get the mom on board. There is just no reasoning with this kind of stupid. If that is truly what the mom told the teacher over the phone, to just let him not do any work, then yeah, let him fail. Let him flunk. Let him never complete school. And if they can get by with him, not getting a degree someday, so be it. So be it. Their decision, their loss. Story 16. There is a kid named Lawrence who was one of those typical wallflower Catholic kids I grew up with. His dad was in our scout troop as a leader and was really meticulous. Like, everything had to be just so. In the late 70s, most of the troop leaders had a relaxed dress code, but Lawrence's dad dressed like a 1940s scouting manual model, complete with a brown uniform and wide-brimmed hat. Everything was pleated and pressed. His dad drove an old MG Roadster that was constantly breaking down. They were upper class, and Mom was not in the picture. But the way Lawrence's dad picked on him was brutal. Stand up straight, Lawrence. Chin up. Be a good lad. Chest out. Chin up. Lawrence, don't go over there. It's dirty over there. Lawrence, stand straight and tall when I address you. Don't be rude. Wait until I've started eating before you start. Lawrence, do I have to raise my voice, Lawrence? By high school, Lawrence just gave up. He wasn't perfect enough, so why bother? He stared into space. He attended school in person only, just a blank and hollow shell. His clothing didn't change, it only became dirtier. His hair got long, he lost weight, and his clothes just hung on him. I think the only way to deal with his dad's control issues was passive resistance. By his senior year in high school, he flunked out. Not sure what happened to him after that. Story 17. I teach lots of 7 to 9-year-olds and quite often ask them to spell their names for me just so I get it correct for them. Rachel or Rachel, etc. But you wouldn't believe how many of these children don't have a clue. I appreciate some may be dyslexic in that, so I don't expect all of them to know, but just more surprised at such a high percentage. Story 18. I've got a class of 8th grade students, and we just got a new student. In his first week, he proceeded to grab a female student's butt with both hands. I call him up to my desk and ask him if he knows what unwanted touching and SA mean. Without emotion, he says yes he does, but he's new so he needs to make a name for himself. I immediately sent him to the office. The saddest part about this is that the response I got from the administration is that the student was spoken to about the situation, and I needed to make sure they did not sit near each other. No consequence for SA equals you can be assured that something like this will happen again. Story 19. Okay, I need you guys to name some countries for me. Let's make a list. I get a few examples, and then Africa! I proceed to explain the concept of a continent. So wait, Africa is a country inside of a country? Like Tasmania is a country but is in Australia? Please keep in mind that this was a year 11 high school class. Story 20. Just this week, I have a student in grade 5 that is pretty oppositional, has a tough home life, etc. He doesn't always try very hard, but sometimes I can see he's trying to put in some effort. We were talking about how I grade them, and he interrupts the conversation with, I don't care at all about my grades. And I thought, here we go, another rant about how unfair school is. I just want to know that I keep getting better. Perfect. I got chills. Story 21. Had my year 2 private student try to flip/overturn his study table on me. Didn't work. I slammed it down. And scream at me to write out his homework because that's what his mom pays me for. There's still hope, but it made me so sad and angry as soon as he assumed I was one of a lesser position than him just because I was being paid. Like, yeah, nah, bye. Story 22. This is probably going to be buried, but I like to reference this one from time to time. I had a student who was a hoarder. He was one of those kids that we all remember who had the backpack that was filled with everything for every class. It looked like this kid carried around a small grocery cart on his back. One day, I'm walking him to his locker to look for an assignment that I knew I had given him before, and I smell this nasty smell. Big surprise, it's his locker. Open it to find 89 cartons of chocolate milk stacked inside. That's not all. On the floor, he had a pretty large mason jar filled with what looked like dead bugs. I asked him why he had so much milk in his locker, and he said, stone-faced, to dip the bugs in. Never sure what happened to this kid when he left, but that was the most disturbing for me. Story 23. I'm too late, but for those of you sorting by new, maybe this will give you a chuckle. I was covering cells and organelles, and I was passing around a model of a cell that highlighted organelles, what they looked like and where they were. It gets to a girl, and she takes a look at it and says, "What planet is this?" Story 24. Me. What country did the United States gain independence from? Student. Hispanic? Me. Tynesha, that's an ethnicity. Student. Nuh-uh, it's a country in Africa. Me, internally. Tynesha, you're effing 13. What the hell? Me, externally. Okay, well, can someone help Tynesha answer the question? Other student. France! Story 25. In a high school psychology class during the unit on drugs and their impact on the brain, I'm having students read and discuss an article about the neuroscience behind mixing drugs, like Xanax and codeine and lean. Some future frat house cum dumpster chimes in from the back of the room, unexpectedly, bragging loudly about how she loves getting turned on a mixture of weed, Xans, and Molly, and how it's become her go-to form of intoxication for her and her older boyfriend. Before I can hit her with the standard, "Hey, psych class is not an episode of Intervention" type of response, I get this gem. My boyfriend can't even get off if he's not on Molly. Do you think it causes brain damage? Story 26. Not a teacher, but still, you'll see. High school, so like age 15. One of the bigger kids, like 6 feet, decided he'd open the window and climb into the classroom. In the process, breaks a window and an arm as he falls in head first and tried to brace the impact with his arm. Story 27. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in 5th grade, there was a guy in my class whose parents were among the more affluent in town and that donated a lot of money to the school in every way they could. They paid for the new computer lab and library renovation. They practically owned the school and staff. This guy could scream at teachers, throw desks, attack classmates, and never get in trouble because his parents had that much power over them. He sent me to the hospital with my first concussion when he spontaneously slammed my head into a locker. I got 3 detentions because his parents decided the story was I had provoked him, and then another 3 when I refused to apologize to him for said provocation. There was never hope for him. I didn't hear much because we moved to a different city to escape that school, but I heard he dropped out of high school, got his GED, then died serving in Iraq because his parents' influence couldn't get him a job outside their hometown. Most people would call him a hero for that, but he wasn't. Story 28. I teach computer science in university. I get a lot of freshmen that pluck the major because they heard it was a high-paying major, but don't actually like the subject. But the worst was a recent student that asked if they could just do the assignments by hand. They didn't want to use a computer. They didn't really like using them. People use computers too much. I don't start doing that. Also, thought computers could do too much and wanted people to stop using them. Bruh, this is a programming course for computers in a major about making computers do things. You're gonna need to use a computer. Needless to say, I told them this probably wasn't the best major for them. Story 29. I'm not a teacher, but my 12-year-old son told me of an exchange a fellow student of his had with their science teacher, in which the student attested that it was her understanding that the sun was located on the Earth's equator, which is why it is so much warmer there. I can only imagine what must have gone through that poor woman's head hearing that. Story 30. The students where I teach are challenging. It's a rural community of about 2,500 people. Lots of troubles at home, and about 95% of all students straight up don't give a crap. One girl was on her 4th attempt of Science 10, and was again getting zeros because she does nothing and barely shows up. She was in my class again this year, but she decided to do Adult Basic instead because she will be 18 soon. She failed that too. Another girl gets high every lunch and comes to class blitzed out of her skull, just staring blankly at the paper. Called her parents, but it turned out it was them who smoked pot with her that lunch hour. What do you know? One teacher here is severely allergic to perfume. One kid brought some to school and sprayed it in her face. She was in the hospital for almost a week, barely able to breathe through her trachea. Some kid called her a female dog on her first day back. Monday will be fun. Story 31. I was doing a presentation on the AIDS crisis in India for my 10th grade history class. I asked the class what they thought the government could do to help those afflicted. Send all the people with AIDS to fight for us in Iraq. She was completely serious and is now an RN at a world-renowned teaching hospital. I laughed out loud and still got an A. Story 32. Emailed me to set up a parent-teacher conference between me and his mom to discuss his class performance and grades. Used his personal email address, xxstonerking420xx. This was a university student. Story 33. Had one teen girl claim her 5-year-old brother was abused by his classmates in the toilet. We investigated it completely. There was no abuse. Teen girl demanded we call the police on the other little kid, then didn't believe that A, nothing happened, B, the kid is well below the age of criminal responsibility, C, if the kid did do something, we'd be looking at their family since that type of behavior can mean abuse at home. So what the story was that the young boys were in the toilet. The other boy was knocking on the boy in the toilet's door, telling him to hurry up. Story 34. When a kid expressed his love for hot dog on a cob. It was a corn dog. Edit. Not a teacher, but I asked a teacher. Edit 2. Miss Redacted said the child was 10 years old at the time the comment was made. Edit 3. The child is a 10-year-old inner-city boy. He also asked what a justice frog is after we said the Pledge of Allegiance. Story 35. When I first started teaching at this one community college, I created some group problems, and one was a challenge problem. A girl said that she would drop if the class was going to be this hard and stayed afterwards for a little to patronize me on how to teach. I appreciate wanting to hear more examples, but to be told we don't do things that way here, my mouth hit the floor. Being a younger teacher is not fun. Story 36. I once had a student that was telling me about a camping trip he just got back from. He said that while he was in the woods, he found a tick on him. It was filled with blood. He then proceeded to tell me that he got the tick, threw it into a frying pan, and ate it. He said, protein. That's when I realized there was no chance in hell for this kid. I still shake my head when I think about it. Story 37. My brother teaches junior high in a very small, rural, low-income community. As a new teacher, he basically got the special math classes the other teachers wouldn't take. My favorite story, apparently it was a very naive move on his part to let them choose their own seats at the beginning. After the second week, he made a seating chart. It didn't go over well, and he told his students if they didn't like it to write him a note with where they'd like to sit, fold it up, and put it in the trash can. By the end of the day, apparently there were 10 or so neatly folded suggestions in his trash can. Story 38. I'm a tutor for athletes at a university. Most of them are alright, good enough students. But they have so many scaffolds, tutors, mentors, and a team of adults creating their entire schedules, all the way down to when they eat, study, and sleep, that students sometimes think they're not responsible for any of it. They don't know when their own exams are. They usually ask me. I'm a tutor, not a scheduler. They always walk into the tutoring session asking, "What are we doing today?" And that's not how it works. They need to tell me what they need help with. Otherwise, I have no idea what chapter they're in or what they're doing in class. I'm not allowed to be in contact with their professors or TAs. That's their job. A lot of them are clearly only there to play football. Some have even told me as much, and only want to pass their classes for this reason. They're not thinking about their careers outside the NFL. The worst part is, most of this is the fault of the school. The school gives them so many scaffolds so they can keep their star athletes who would otherwise fail out their first semester. The school wants them to focus on football instead of classes because they bring in money. They have study halls where the athletes walk in and are handed a sheet detailing what assignments they need to finish that day and sit next to mentors who make sure they actually get finished. No wonder they ask me what to do. As a student who's not an athlete, it actually makes me angry, thinking how easy college would be if I had all those scaffolds. But the university is basically setting them up for failure. If they don't go on to play in the NFL, who's going to hire them? Edit. I feel like I should mention, this is not all the athletes, and not even all the football players, though they tend to be the biggest culprits. I usually run into this problem when the athlete himself didn't request the tutor, me, but a mentor or supervisor did after they got a bad grade. Sometimes they don't even know they're getting a tutor until I show up. The whole thing is terribly mismanaged, but in particular, if they need a tutor but don't want one, it's indicative of this larger issue. But if students request a tutor themselves, they're usually much more competent individuals. Story 39. Not a teacher, but some guy I know dropped out of school at the age of 12 because he was bullied. Note, I don't believe that to be the cause. He then spent the next 8 years chain smoking in his nan's front room, playing computer games and smoking weed/drinking. Now at the age of 16, he was eligible for some benefits from the government, but even then he was too lazy to just go down to the job center and get someone to fill in the forms for him if he fakes dyslexia. He could read and write fine, and do basic maths no problem, and was very street smart, so even free money couldn't tempt him to get out of the house. Eventually, I landed him a manual labor gig in which he lasted 2 weeks, going home early because it was too hard, and then got fired. A few months pass and he gets a gig in a local off license owned by a friend's parents. Gets fired because he was asked to dispose of some cardboard boxes by ripping them up and putting them in the recycle container. Boss comes back at the end of the day to find that he has literally sat there and torn half a box up by hand into tiny squares. Gets fired on the spot. A couple more years pass, and this time another friend hooks him up in a care home where he does night shifts. Suits him fine, as all he does is minor requests for the people there. As far as I know, he's still employed there, and I suppose the moral of the story is, even if you think there's no hope for some people, all they really need is the right environment to do what's needed, and that's it. He's an alright guy. Okay, friend, but honestly, I can't help but feel like he has so much wasted potential at something. Still wondering if he'll stick with that job or just sack it. But honestly, I sincerely hope that the better side of humanity prevails here and he keeps working at something. Story 40. He didn't say anything because he's mostly nonverbal and he had Down syndrome. He had been bounced around so many foster homes and had very obviously been abused at some point. His behavior was scary, and if he had been in my class longer than a few months, he probably would have qualified for the therapeutic campus. He never stayed long enough in one spot to get the help he needed. So I don't say this to make it out to be his fault, because the fault is with his bio parents in the foster system. I hope he's okay now, but I don't have high hopes for him ever having a normal life. Story 41. Oi, how to state this. I work with autistic elementary students, primarily nonverbal or lower functioning. Now, on one hand, you could say they're not going to change, just on the state of their disorder. However, you'd be surprised the amount of personality present and how their environment and parents can have an effect on their behavior. So, I work with one kid closely. I love the little brat dearly. He's probably our most verbal student and talks in a very squeaky voice. He's always quoting or saying something in his own head, often from television shows, and sometimes it's the cutest thing. However, for a long time, he's been a brat. In trying to go to class, we could not get him to sit down and do one problem without him fighting us to get up and run around the room like a madman. If we tried to get him to do his work or sent him to timeout, which we call break, he would get frustrated and start screaming or crying, kind of disruptive to the class as a whole. So we implemented a structured way of doing things, very basic. 2 minutes of work, 2 minutes of play. If you don't do your work, yell or scream, then you take a 2-minute break in the corner. As you can imagine, this didn't go so well at first. Literally fought the kid for 2 or 3 weeks over this concept, and he spent plenty of days doing no work and all his time in the corner screaming his brains out. After that, he started to get it, and guess what? He's usually our star student. I said usually though, and here are a few things I found interesting and relevant to the parent thing a lot of commenters have been talking about. 1. During that initial period, there was a moment in break where he was just sobbing and crying and couldn't pull himself together. Snot was coming out of his nose and he asked, "I need a tissue." So I got him a tissue, and when I brought it to him, he leaned forward as if for me to wipe his nose for him. I said, "No, you can do this yourself," to which he responded with an even louder shriek, and even more crying ensued. It was readily apparent that this was something he was used to at home. He was used to literally getting everything he wanted, hand over foot, at home, to the point where mom was wiping his nose for him. 2. Any period of break from school, a weekend, winter vacation, etc., we would see a lot of these behaviors come back. It was literally like a reset, and we would once again have to spend more time in break than usual to kick those bad habits back out. Clearly, things at home are run vastly different than at school. 3. A lot of what he quotes in his babble reflects what comes from home. You can imagine the stuff coming from an abused parrot, similar to what I experience. Luckily for me, it's not a lot of swearing. However, when the child gets frustrated, he'll start saying things like, "Shut the door!" in whatever other meddlesome language you can imagine angry parents might yell. It's a little disheartening. I love the children I work with, but when you hear and see this stuff, you just wish there was a lot more you could do at home. I'm sure this kid has a bright future for his level. He may even make it to be independent enough to live on his own. However, I still wish I could do more for him. Story 42. This is my second year being a high school chemistry tutor, and my first being an Algebra 2 tutor. My student this year is probably the stupidest person at the school, and really only got into the elite private school because her mother is a teacher there. I was teaching her dimensional analysis last week, and I wanted her to convert miles to inches. I gave her 5280, because F the imperial system and its bullcrap numbers. But when I asked her how many inches were in a foot, she put down her pencil, looked at me, and just said, I asked her how many inches were on a ruler, something she uses quite often for graphing and whatnot. And she said, I don't know, I don't have a ruler in front of me. Story 43. 7th grade in the US. On the first day of class, the students each said what they did over the summer. One kid said he went to Germany. The kid sitting next to him audibly asked where that was and if it was further away than Chicago. I thought he must have misunderstood what the first guy said, so I intervened. Chicago is about 100 miles away. Germany is in Europe. That's another continent entirely. The kid looked blankly at me and asked what that was. The word continent. I was dumbfounded and gestured at the map of the world on the wall and pointed at the continents, thinking he must have learned them pronounced differently or something. But nope, he literally didn't know what they were, and never realized that the picture on the wall of the geography room was actually a map of the world. He was in 7th grade, and he didn't know what a continent was, or even a toddler's level of understanding of what a map was. Story 44. Well, I didn't think there was no hope left. I just got frustrated. I was student teaching, and the senior class was very difficult. They basically just sat there as if they were half dead and barely paid attention to anything. One of them is friends with my brother, so he was actually over at my house frequently. Kinda awkward. And when I tried to ask him how I could improve in teaching that class, he said I can't because they don't care about literature. They think it's stupid and boring. To BF, the authors I was covering, which I did not get to pick, were 18th century hymn writers and preachers, so I didn't have a lot to work with as far as interest goes. But still, kinda sucked to hear that they'd already made up their minds. Story 45. It bums me out how many answers on this thread involve a student not knowing something you think is obvious, like which way north is or what a port is. Everyone has blind spots in their knowledge. I'm a 31-year-old woman with multiple degrees who lived in a farm country for 5 years and recently learned that a pony isn't a baby horse. We all have blind spots or oh duh moments. It's upsetting to me that teachers would get online and turn their students into jokes about these little moments for, what, internet points? And perpetuate the us versus them feeling that makes school feel so hostile and unappealing to many students in the first place. The college students I teach have all sorts of blind spots and difficulties with things that seem simple to me. I frequently have freshmen who don't know how to capitalize the word I, or don't know the meanings of common words, or need repeated explanations, sometimes for 10 full weeks, about when and why to start a new paragraph in an essay. And when they ask these questions, I answer them, because that's my freaking job, and my students and I are on the same team. Team student. So I've kind of refrained from weighing in on some of these stories and dunking on the posters, but I completely agree with this point of view right here. You can't really hold a student accountable or make fun of them for not knowing something. That's why they're in school, and that's why you are a teacher, and it's your job to teach these things. So behavioral issues, misconduct in class, that's something that I think is appropriate to share. But like, if a kid doesn't know that, Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States, I mean, come on, like that's not funny. That's definitely not something that I think you should, out on the internet, even though you're not naming the student by name. It's like, what teacher does that? So yeah, I totally agree with this point of view. Hopefully we don't see too much more of that. Story 46. 1. I had a junior in high school once include in a paper that without oil from the Middle East, we couldn't have French fries. She was unable to understand the difference between petroleum oil and vegetable oil. 2. Every year, I've had 2 or 3 knuckleheads, female and male, that state that they don't need school because they will either be A, a pro athlete, B, a reality star, or C, in adult content. Okay, that's funny. If you have kids, please remember to parent them. Story 47. Me. What's your plan? How are you going to graduate treating school the way you do? Student. Oh, I'm going to graduate. If I don't, I'll just sell drugs and make that paper. Me. What happens if you get caught? Student. I won't get caught. I've been running the streets as long as I can remember. It's what I know. Student was expelled 3 times for violent behavior, and our district office overturned it every time because of an IEP on file for her. The mother is afraid of her own child and has no control over her. Story 48. I was giving a final exam. A girl was sitting on her feet in a very unbalanced computer chair, wobbling back and forth. I told her 3 times to sit with her feet flat on the floor. She kept putting them down and then slowly working them back under her ass again every time I passed. Finally, she fell over and crashed hard onto the floor, then proceeded to start laughing at the top of her lungs and rolling up and down the floor. The entire class was totally distracted, and this was a final where you needed every minute to be able to finish. When I finally managed to get her to stop laughing, I told her that she was disqualified from the final and that she was to report to the assistant principal's office immediately. She asked me what the problem was. I told her that repeatedly ignoring my request to sit properly in the chair was bad enough without the crash and the tremendous distraction. She said, "I bet it's only a problem because I'm black." Good God. It's like, please keep thinking that and use it to justify your outrageous behavior. Story 49. I student teach for college and I've seen it all. The kids don't just act better / try harder just because there's a student teacher in the room. One kid in a tutoring program had great math skills. I think his name was Caden. 3rd grader doing long division easily. From what I've seen in local schools, long division isn't until 4th grade. He was teaching himself fractions and they were all correct. I'd never seen that, even in gifted classes. The tutoring program was for at-risk kids, most of which didn't have parents at home 90% of the time, so they usually didn't get breakfast or dinner at home or any kind of praise or study time. Most of them were below the poverty line or being raised by a barely older sibling. This kid was the only one that tried and didn't come for the after-school sandwiches. For the first month or 2, he was excited and eager and was glad that I was helping him and being proud. I was effing impressed. He was being made fun of by the other kids for trying so hard and basically being smart. Over the next 2 months, he started doing less self-teaching and stopped turning in his homework. It was all done and correct, but he'd just stick it in his bag and not turn it in. His grades started dropping and they made fun of him for that. After that, he'd come to tutoring and just put his head down on the desk, eat the sandwich, do a few questions, and leave. He eventually stopped coming, and by the next semester, I heard that he had started breaking rules and getting in trouble. This poor kid was doing so well, excelling even, and his fear of sticking out turned him into a completely different kid. I don't know what happened to him since I moved to another school. This was 3 years ago, so I can only hope something changed or he got help and he went back to normal. Poor Caden. Story 50. Reading all the stories here make me realize, even more so than usual, how lucky I am to have turned out so well given my chaotic, abusive, and awful home life. I knew if I effed up, I'd be stuck in a crappy situation and I would die there. This kept me on the straight and narrow. I was a decent high school student. Graduated a few months late because of standardized testing. I had a 3.0 and they wouldn't let me walk because I didn't pass the math portion of Texas standardized testing. But I still graduated, moved out of my crappy situation, went right into the workforce, got my own place, got into college as soon as I could, and I'll be done with my undergrad degrees, I'm double majoring, in hopefully 2 years. And then on to my master's. I'm 30, so it's taken me longer to accomplish these things, but I refuse to give up. Coming from a crappy home life, I stayed on the straight and narrow, ran with the nerd crowd, did a bunch of after-school stuff, band, choir, and theater, to keep around positive, smart people from good homes. I stayed away from drugs, never skipped class, not even on senior skip day. Makes me feel really fortunate I dug myself out and didn't end up like a lot of these kids in these threads that came from really bad homes, some worse than mine, like I did. Teachers really are saints. I would be so sad every day seeing kids set up to fail like I was and succumb to it. This is a really good story, and honestly, I think that this poster here should, go around to schools and give his testimony about how he was able to kind of dodge a potentially hazardous path that, he was set on strictly due to the environment that he was brought up in, which is not something that he could control. But what he could control is what he was able to do after he grew up. And it sounds like he's got a good head on his shoulders and, he is showing that no situation is hopeless. So I think if he is able to speak to people that can identify with him and his story, there might be more lives out there that could be turned around because of it. So yeah, cool story. Story 51. Different days, school years, and students. Ira, can you die if you stop breathing? 13-year-old girl. Ira, I can't feel my pulse. Oh my God, I can't feel my pulse. Same girl as before. Her twin sister starts freaking out because she tries and can't find her own pulse either. Me, where are you looking for it? My neck. With her thumb, I should add. Me. Sometimes it's difficult to find it. You can be sure by checking your heartbeat. I wanted to end the nonsense quickly. Both girls place their hands on the right part of their chests and freak out more. I can't feel it. Am I dead? Oh my God. Why doesn't Madrid have a beach? 10 to 11-year-old boy. Me. It's in the middle of the country. Student. Yeah, okay, but why isn't there a beach? Sorry, miss. I'm late because I was waxing my butt. 17-year-old guy. And more. Facepalm. Story 52. High school teacher here. Recently had something valuable stolen from my classroom. Student who stole it did it after school hours and was caught on video clearly walking into my room, then leaving with it not long after. Myself and my principal pulled her aside and asked if she stole it. She said no. Showed her the video of her doing it. Still denied it. Brought mom in. Mom said she didn't do it. Showed mom the video of her daughter clearly walking out of my room with it. Still denied it. Told them her daughter was going to face an expulsion hearing, not her first offense, if she didn't apologize, return the item, and come up with a solution on how she was going to make it right. Both still claim she didn't do it. Her expulsion hearing is tomorrow. I understand that you always want to believe your child, but the video is crystal clear and we're offering you an out if you admit to what you've done and make it right. Still nope. Kids need to know there are repercussions for their actions and not just blindly defend everything they've ever done. But yet when this story gets told from mom, this school has it out for her daughter and she's done nothing wrong. Story 53. I keep a running list. Context. I work in a high school in several classrooms. Mista, what was Obama? A Republican, right? Teacher. Does anyone know who Adam Smith is? Oh, I know that guy. He's the one on the beer. Teacher. No, that's Sam Adams. Can anyone tell me the two major political parties in the United States? Student 1. Like Native American, right? Student 2. No, it's George Washington. History teacher honestly referred to Merrick Garland as she and her nomination as students questioned, I wonder if Republicans just blocked her because she was a woman. Teacher. IUDs, of EUDs, individual explosive devices. Student. Well, Trump is a Muslim, so I don't understand why he's banning Muslims. Story 54. I work with a second grader who has 3 new boyfriends a week. Not in a cute, innocent way, but a seriously messed up and inappropriate way. She wears really scandalous outfits and walks around sticking her butt out. She goes around telling boys she wants to kiss them and they're all in love with her. She started seeking out the quiet, innocent girls in her class and convincing them to go tell the boys that they like them. She glares at us to wait until we're not looking to talk to the younger kids, kinder and first grade, about really inappropriate subjects. She's always watching me because she knows I know what she's up to and will wait until I turn my back to whisper gross things to kids. We talk to her parents every week about her being inappropriate and discussing relationships and sexual things with other students. It's no surprise that her young, good-looking mom and her boyfriend, who's at least 10 years younger than her, don't talk to her about it. I knew she was going to end up 16 and pregnant when she said, "Miss, do you have a boyfriend?" When I responded no, she says, "I know why you don't have a boyfriend. Boys don't like you. They like me, though. This week I'm dating 3 boys and they all want to kiss me. She makes me cringe." Story 55. We watched Ender's Game in my 7th grade Intro to Robotics class as part of a sci-fi/imagination/think outside the box lesson at the beginning of the year. It's normally iRobot, but I wanted to see the movie based on a beloved old book, even though I didn't hear good things about it, and I'm the teacher, so I have that power. The entire class was completely incapable of understanding why Ender thought it was wrong to destroy an entire species and said they'd do it without hesitation. I tried everything to get them to realize why genocide is bad, but all was met with, "They're just aliens, who cares?" I know their brains have literally not developed to the point where they're good at empathy, but man, they know what the Holocaust was. They know it was bad. They know Hitler is in the top 5 list of worst people in history. They still couldn't figure it out. I died a little inside that day. Story 56. 2 things. 1. There are 2 Pacific Oceans, right? 2. Student. So when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, they were trying to, declare, that they were, what's that word where you're, not with someone anymore? Me. Independent? Student. Yeah, they were trying to declare that they were independent? Story 57. English language teacher in Hong Kong. I was teaching them how to write a paper on causes and effects. I asked what some major causes of traffic were in Hong Kong. Mainlanders, one student said, and numerous others nodded. I asked how most mainlanders travel to Hong Kong. Knowing the answer, the underground train, they said the MTR. They haven't realized they've just discounted their own argument. So if they come by the MTR, how can mainlanders coming to Hong Kong affect the traffic? Blank faces. Silence. These are adults. Story 58. I teach high school. A couple years ago, I was talking about The Force Awakens with a couple of my students when we got back from break. It was during the passing period, when our class was about to start, but I was giving a couple stragglers a little longer while I talked Star Wars. Since the film had only been out 2 weeks at that point, my students and I were talking quietly about it on the side of the classroom to avoid spoiling anything for anyone who hadn't seen it. Suddenly, from the other side of the class, one of the most unpleasant girls shouts across the room, "Hey, Han Solo dies in the new Star Wars!" I shook my head and told her that was an ugly thing to do. Unfortunately, I couldn't really justify a hard punishment for it either. I've had plenty of students who've annoyed me, but that's one of the few times I've thought, wow, you're just a bad person. Story 59. In 17 years of teaching a large number of challenging kids in an economically and socially disadvantaged region, 4 communities across a vast northern Canadian geography, I've never had a student say something that made me think there's no hope for them. Maybe I'm just lucky? Maybe I just look at the things they say differently? I've seen a number of students eventually find their way to becoming guests of the Queen, as they had been cautioned for many years before would be the destination they would arrive at if they kept making some of the decisions they make. I've also seen them come back from incarceration, addiction, and numerous problems to re-enter the community as parents, employees, and leaders. No hope left? No, never. Story 60. I taught algebra and algebra 2 in high school. One day, I was helping a student after school get ready for a proficiency test. We're working on a problem, and he said to me, "Yeah, but half of 50 is 0, right?" I thought I had misheard him. I asked him to repeat it. He said, with all sincerity, "Half of 50 is 0. There was no guile, no hint of humor in his voice. He wasn't trolling me. I gently corrected him and moved on. I was baffled. Later on, another math teacher explained to me his thinking. He was splitting the number vertically in his mind. Half of 50 equals 5 split 0. So 1/2 is a 0. I quit that year. I don't think like that. I can't think like that. And I realized there was a whole group of students that I could never reach. Alright, so this seems like a bit of an overreaction. I mean, obviously the kid was incorrect in his approach to doing the math, but at least he was trying, and there's something of a basis of sense and logic involved in it. So to quit your job over that instead of correcting and teaching and doing your job is kind of shallow. Shame on you. Story 61. I had a 3rd grader tell me she couldn't wait to turn 13 so she could quit school and be a mom. Her backstory? Her mom has 7 kids with 7 dads, can't read, and had baby number 1 at age 13. Pretty sure mom was a stripper because my 8-year-old student would come in exhausted, spit up on her shoulder from being up with her baby brother all night. Poor thing. Story 62. I teach English as a foreign language, and one day I was using the sentence, "The man is driving the van," as an example for something. A student interrupts me to ask what the hell a van is. Never mind that the word in our native language for van is van. Spelled the same way, pronounced practically the same way too. I repeated the word 6 times, wrote it on the board so she could visualize it and see that it's the same effing thing in our language. Nothing. She could understand the meaning of "the man is driving the," but the van part just wouldn't click. The other students started to get nervous and told her in our native language, "Van y van." Van means van, and it still took her about 5 minutes to realize that, well, van means van. Story 63. I was a student observing this situation. My 10th grade teacher's dad died. She went to the Philippines for the funeral. When she came back, the sub had left her incredible detailed notes for how crappy the students were. She went on a semi-long and well-deserved rant about how disappointed she was in us and how she came home from the funeral of one of the most important people in her life to see that all the supplies she put her own money into for our benefit were destroyed, stolen, and vandalized. We all felt bad, of course, until that kid opened his mouth. This kid got up and said, "Your dad is still dead, though." Completely unprovoked and uncalled for. We all knew what he said was effed up. She didn't respond. She left the room. A security lady took over the class about 10 minutes later until the school found the teacher with a free period and eventually a sub. We didn't see her for another 4 days after that. Apparently the comment messed with her a lot more than she allowed us to view. She was insanely close to her dad, according to her colleagues. Story 64. I taught excluded 16 to 17-year-olds mainly with behavioral problems and additional needs. There were many moments that made me doubt some futures, but the main one? When I was 6 months pregnant, one boy threatened to stab my baby through my stomach with a broken stick. He found it hilarious. I reported it to my manager, who took the "oh, bless him, he didn't mean it" line. A few weeks later, he'd moved out of his grandparents' house, who had taken him in and were good people, and then ended up on the streets. Story 65. I used to do one-on-one behavioral therapy with one kid with autism who got really violent and aggressive when he was asked to do a non-preferred activity. I came to his house one day and he was playing video games. When I asked his father to tell him to turn off the game, the father said, "I can't. He'll hit me." I worked with that kid for 2 years. Eventually, my agency had to discharge him because he made zero progress in that time. Parents that fear their own children are hopeless. Story 66. My wife is a teacher, and a second grader was acting up, generally not following any rules. So she takes recess from him, and while everyone else is out playing, he has to sit in the classroom. So it's just her and this kid, and he has his head down, resting on his hands. She's grading papers or something. Suddenly, he sits up and stares at her, and in a gravelly monster voice, this little kid says, "I'm going to eat your soul." He then went right back to sulking. Mom came to the parent-teacher conference with a feather glued to her forehead. Story 67. I had a student my very first year of teaching that was old enough to drive themselves to middle school. This student skipped just as much as they legally could without either them or their parent getting into serious legal trouble. When they were in class, they did anything but what they should. If they were told to stand, they would sit. Asked to read something out loud, they'd be silent. Asked to be silent, they'd start telling stories to the people next to them as loud as they could. Kid was one of 6 brothers and sisters in a family where mom was there only in the physical sense. There was a time I had to go through a report because I hadn't seen the kid for a week and a half with zero information as to why. My school is pretty crap, so when I went to ask, the people in charge of this kind of stuff reacted like, "Wait, you haven't seen them in how long? Female dog, it's literally your job to notice and report this stuff, not mine." So they make calls and do their thing, and I check up with them later to see what they found. They called mom, and mom said she didn't notice the kid was gone. Turns out they left with one of their older brothers to go live with the members of his gang. The kid came back acting exactly the same as they had been. Kid failed every class, ended up in a corrective program like every year, then got pushed forward a grade like always. This family was just raised to hate authority and any sort of system that wasn't from their street. I did all the reporting I could to get something from CPS, but from what I could find, this parent knew all the right ways to not tick the inspector's boxes when they stopped by. Still blows my mind in so many ways thinking about it, that this kid was so smart and used that natural gift to game the system just right so that it ruined their future, that the family was never taken from that horrid parent, that the parent raised her children for a life of drugs, trafficking, and prison. I overheard one of the brothers talking one time about how he can't wait for a cop to try and arrest him so he could go to jail just like his cousin. Kids like that make teaching hard in so many ways, not just in the classroom where they take teaching time from the other kids. Most of us join this profession because a teacher or multiple influenced our lives in an amazing way, and we want to be that for someone. But you get there and you learn the hard way that there are kids that you can give everything to. Your time, your money, your social opportunities, your sanity, and they either never see it or worse, see you as an antagonistic prick for trying to get involved with them. That kid absolutely hated me, but I was their only teacher actually trying to give them a way out. I was the only one meeting with the counselors about it, meeting with attendance clerks, calling home multiple times a week only to get a full inbox or a nearly incoherent hello followed by a hang up. I lived in a different cycle of poverty than this kid did, but I still wanted to do everything I could to help them the way my teachers helped me. But it changes you when you have someone about to fall off a cliff and you drop everything to go and try and catch them and pull them up, and they use the hand they're hanging on with to flip you off as they fall. Story 68. I'm teaching robotics at a school using Lego. There is an 11-year-old girl. She declined to do anything at my lessons. Her reasoning was, my mom told me that I won't succeed in STEM field because I'm not engineering oriented. She told me I'm a linguist. Enough said. I tried several times to reach her. Got no response. Totally forgot about her. The thing is, our school is great at technical stuff in my district, and her parent denies her even a chance to try to figure it out for herself. Story 69. I'm not a teacher, but I did have an experience with a high school kid that made me think, wow, you're effed. Conversation went like this. I don't think we've ever actually been on the moon, or like in space. We wouldn't survive. There's no air. Me, internally, you probably think the Earth is flat too, huh? Externally, what? Why? There's no air. They would die. That's why they have spacesuits. But how would they know they work? They test them first. But like, how? Monkeys and crap? Wow, dude, how do you know all this stuff? Did you go to college? I just listened in school. Story 70. I'm student teaching at a middle school with some 8th graders. They were doing bell work and were told to describe their favorite story. One kid says, I don't have a favorite story. Really, man? Nothing? I asked him to write out the plot of his favorite movie then. I don't like movies. I told him, fine, don't take the points, and walked to the next student. Story 71. Student 1. Mr. So-and-so is so stupid, teaching evolution like it's real. Student 2. I can't believe they let teachers say crap like that. The first student was pregnant at the time she said that. Another one. I'm not going to get a job. I'm just going to inherit my mom's disability check after she dies. Story 72. In a rhetoric course, I had a first-year undergrad who told me he was majoring in science because, quote, science needs someone to correct it after so many years of liberalism. He told me he was writing his persuasive research project on disproving global warming. I said that was fine, just keep in mind any paper needs reputable sources. 2 months later, he comes back to me exasperated and says he can't find any studies to disprove global warming. I hate to break it to the kid. Story 73. Not a teacher, but a therapist. Names, ages, etc. are all changed for confidentiality. Everything written in present tense for the same reason. Jane gets sent to therapy for using weed and landing in court. Her lawyer wants therapy to help this case. The judge would have probably ordered it anyway. During therapy, she signs a release for me to talk to her probation officer once she was sentenced, keeps using weed knowing I have to give updates to her PO, admits to ripping off various dealers, gets another drug charge, revoking her plea in abeyance, gets a charge for illegally possessing a pistol, admits the gun is stolen and that she helped steal it, but it's okay, she was going to sell it, is mad at her mom that she turned her in for having a stolen gun in the house, is mad that she has a bunch of enemies because she's been ripped off by the friendly neighborhood weed dealers, ghosted halfway through therapy, and then wanted to get completion letters sent to her PO. Sadly, this happens a lot. Another. John is a teen too young to drive, uses F like most people use the spacebar, smokes weed constantly, not an exaggeration, this kid is high 24/7. The parent knows and doesn't care because it makes him easier to deal with, gets into physical fights regularly, including with cars, family history of drug use, and dad keeps him around for the child support and government welfare. He complains in every session about how much his kids cost. Straight F grades last year, uses the N-word despite being white, might have something to do with all those fights, but at least he isn't using it as an insult. He just wants to act tough. Has no aspirations outside from smoking more weed. CPS could probably just move in at this point with how many times they've been called to the house. This kid is going nowhere fast. He knows it and doesn't care. Story 74. I worked with a lot of students, mostly with kids in children's residential centers, so I've heard a lot of this sort of sentence. I had a student. She was smart, athletic, charismatic, and lived in a house where her brother, mother, and father were all well-connected bangers. We're reading a book. I forget its name, but it had a theme about what makes a house a home. She was reading her essay about it, and it was just bullcrap. There was a crap answer, the whole essay said nothing, and I told her so. She got quiet and crappy. The next student read their essay and concluded that family, security, and trust is what makes a house a home. My student, my girl, and I love this kid, she stands up and yells at me, and at the kid who just finished reading. I don't remember what she said exactly, but it was something like, F that bullcrap, my home isn't like that. I go to sleep and sometimes I wake up and my brother has an effing gun to my head. Sometimes my dad is climbing under the covers, or sometimes my mom is screaming at me for stealing her crap. My home isn't effing like that at all. My home... And then she just stops like she realized that she didn't have a home, but just a whole ton of toxic mother effers ruining her life. I really felt like she thought she was effed no matter what. And that's what makes me think a kid is truly screwed. 2 weeks later, I'm saying goodbye to her as they strap on the leg cuffs because she's decided on prison. At least they get 3 hots and a cot. So she jumped other girls until she racked up enough charges to get tried as an adult. I've seen her since then. It's not all bad endings. Her brother, a fairly notorious local banger, is in lockup, but she's out, gainfully employed, and the mother of one cute-ass kid. She seems a lot happier.